Day, this is Jay once again. I'm going to talk to you concerning a problem with violence in Islam. Let me just put the camera over here a bit more. People are really scratching their head as to why these bombings are going on and why, though we hear this mantra over and over and over again from Muslims that Islam is a religion of peace, yet almost every day we open the paper and we see about another attempt at bombing or bombing itself. And when we look at Muslim countries, almost all the countries that are Muslim seem to be at conflict, either internally or externally. And we ask, why, if this is a religion of peace, and we hear it all the time, this is a religion of peace and Muhammad is a man of peace, and the Quran, this book here, is a book of peace, why is there so much warfare? Why is there so much bloodshed that's happening in a religion? Now, understandably, a political body or a social body would be at war. Certainly politics and certainly countries go to war. Probably not as much as what we're seeing here with these Muslim countries. But what is behind it? Now, to help understand it, two Muslims here in Britain have come to the fore. One is named Hassan Dutt, who used to be a radical. He has now come and left radicalism. He is now going on television. He's been on the radio and he's been in print. And I think he's along with another man named Ed Hussain, who wrote this book here called Islamist. Ed Hussain, who also used to be a radical, used to be a member of the Muhajirun party, of a radical group that I've had a lot of contact with, Sheikh Umar Bakri Muhammad, who was the founder of that group. Both of them have been coming to the fore and they've been saying some interesting things. Basically what Hassan Dutt and Edward Hussain are saying is that Islam, to understand Islam, you have to understand that there are a number of motivation factors behind this radicalism, this violence that's being perpetrated by these radicals. First and foremost, there is a social milieu. Many Muslims live in ghettos. Many Muslims here in Britain, they live amongst their own kind. They marry only their own kind. They spend all their time with each other. And because of that, they isolate themselves from the rest of the world. And for that reason, it stands quite easy for them to see the world as we and them. What's more, they are angered by what they're seeing happening in the world, and there is an awful lot to say that they are angered what's happening in Afghanistan, and they are angered with what's happening in Iraq. It's understandable. Many people are angered. I'm angered. I went on that march in 2003 to stop us going into war. I didn't see any reason for us to go to Iraq, and I'm still angered by that, as many of my Muslim friends are angered. So certainly there is a motivation, not only the fact that Muslims, when they're angered and they fall back on their own community, they fall back in their own little ghettoized, isolated environment. So it stands to reason you can understand that maybe this is a reaction out of that. But what Hassan Dutt is saying, and so is Edward Hussain, is that it's much more deep than that. Because that which drives the social sphere, that which drives the politics, that which drives the economy, that's what drives Islam as a religion, is its theology. It's theology based on a text, based on this book here, and based on the traditions. The traditions such as the Siratul Rasulullah, which is the biography of the Prophet, and his sayings, the Hadith. This genre of traditions is how Muslims are to act today. And in order to understand how Muslims are to act, in order for them to know what they're to do, they need to go back to the Prophet's example. Now, both Hassan and Edward are saying, can you then understand why so many Muslims are violent? Because the Quran is full of violence. I have a paper here. This one here. That lists 149 sword verses in the Quran. 149 verses that are violent. I could go through a whole litany of them right now. I'll just underline a few that you can look at in your own time. Surah 2, Ayah 190 to 191. Surah 3, 195. Surah 4, 74 to 77. Surah 4, 89 to 91. Surah 5, Ayah 33. Surah 5, Ayah 82. Surah 8, Ayah 9. Surah 8, Ayah 39 to 48. Surah 9, Ayah 5. That's a big one. Surah 9, Ayah 29. Surah 9, Ayah 38. Surah 9, Ayah 73. In fact, there are 20 different verses in Surah 9 alone that are these sword verses. And I could go on and on and on. Surah 47, Ayah 46. There are so many of these verses in the Quran that we could go to that are full of violence, saying to slay the unbeliever, smite off their heads, cut off their hands and feet on opposite sides, do not have anything to do with the Jews. And it is these verses that certainly Hussain and Hassan Dutt are trying to basically let the world know, and basically say these are the verses that undergird, that underline, that give foundation to many of the acts that we're seeing happening in the world today. So if you want to understand what makes them and what motivates them to do their violence, just go back to their scriptures. Just go back to their prophet. And then ask a very simple question. Are those scriptures and is that prophet relevant for today? And the answer is, as they're saying, is absolutely not. And what they're asking is that the Muslims, first of all, start admitting that there is a problem in their community. There is a real problem. Secondly, that problem needs to be confronted, and the only way to confront that problem is by going back and reassessing those scriptures and reassessing the prophet's life and asking whether or not it's relevant for today. And of course, they don't say, neither Hussain Dutt or Hussain really say clearly, but what they're suggesting is, no, these verses are not relevant, and no, the Prophet Muhammad is not relevant. What he did back in the 7th century is just not relevant for today. Now, they're saying quite a bit, and you can understand why so many Muslims are angered by Hussain and Hassan Dutt. I can see their turmoil. I would have difficulty if I was a Muslim who wanted to go back to my scriptures and wanted to hold it up as a paradigm, as a revelation that is universal for all dates, all places, all peoples, and in all times. Can you then understand why, when you get people like Hassan and Edward claiming that there are problems with this revelation, that it's certainly not relevant, these verses are not relevant for today, and maybe we should hold them aside and leave them in the 7th century and try to reassess how we're going to look at the Quran anew. As a Christian, I can see why that's a problem, because as a Christian, I start from the same paradigm. I go back to my scriptures. I go back to the New Testament. I don't go back to the Old Testament to know how I'm to live. I go back to Jesus Christ as my model. And when I look at the New Testament, when it talks about violence, it says to stand away from violence. Blessed are the peacemakers. There in Matthew chapter 26, verse 52, Jesus turns to Peter, who has just used violence against one of the servants who was coming to arrest him in the garden. He puts the ear back onto the servant, and he turns towards Peter, and it says, put away your sword. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. What a revelation for us today. What a paradigm, because even Jesus, every time he was attacked, didn't respond with violence. Muslims are saying it's perfectly okay. If you're attacked, you must defend yourself. Therefore, war is legitimate. Jesus says just the opposite. Blessed are the peacemakers. Put away your sword. Over and over again, he says, love your enemies. Do not aggress those who aggress you. And it's because of the example of Jesus and what he said, because that's my paradigm and that's my authority, this whole debate about violence and what's happening around the world really is the domain of Christianity. We are the ones really that can really talk about peace. We are the really ones that really can go back to a revelation that speaks about peace. This revelation right here. This is the only one, this is the only book, this is the only revelation, the New Testament, that categorically responds with peace, even when aggressed against, even when attacked. Modeled by Jesus Christ, who responded by forgiving those who attacked him, as he was there on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's hard. I can understand why the Hussains and Hassan Dutts are coming to this conclusion. The rest of you Muslims, you need to come to the same conclusion. Follow their example. Realize that your book has problems, has verses that are not relevant for today. Come on home. Come back to the revelation of Jesus Christ. Come back to the example of Jesus Christ. Come back to the peace, the only peace you can find. It's right here. This is the book for today. Jesus is the man for today. We welcome you home. This is Jay.